Hello, thank you guys for tuning in. God bless all of you, everyone that is watching or will watch at a later time. Today's topic is, I think, about as real as it's gonna get, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about sexual trauma. And it was not on the list of topics that I originally thought through talking about. It's actually something pretty recent that I was kind of confronted with or confronted by, and embracing this platform, right, that I've created. I want to talk about something that nobody really knows about. I've never really had this conversation with anyone. The only person that probably knows a little bit about this, and maybe not even as deep in depth, is my husband. And that is because I've really never talked about this before. In a way, have never really wanted to deal with it or like dig into it too much. And I recently was listening to someone share a story about something that almost happened in their childhood, and it is what kind of triggered me to have a wow moment, in a moment where I kind of saw myself in their exact shoes. And they were talking, right, with a psychologist and whatnot, Christian psychologist, and she said, well, we tend to do that a lot. Like, we tend to kind of normalize things that don't fully happen but could have happened. And obviously, right, we're talking about, any type of like sexual abuse or sexual trauma or just exposure to any of those things, right? We tend to, if something didn't actually happen, we tend to kind of just put it off, put it in the back of our mind, especially if it happened at a very young age. And this is something that I've never even discussed with my parents. And I think that when I thought through, and not just thought, but prayed, and when God put this in my heart, right, let's talk about it in my heart, my whole theme is keeping it real, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm open, I'm direct, I'm honest, I'm okay with, exposing different parts of my life, right? It's not all picture perfect. I've always said that, but I definitely did not have this in mind, because again, it's something that I think I've put in the back burner, honestly. And listening to that person share that story of something that almost occurred is what made me realize that I, in my mind, because I've never voiced it out loud other than to my husband, and not even in that way, thought the same thing, right? Like, something that kind of happened. Like, I would just, I guess, downplay. You kind of downplay it in a way because, an abuse actually didn't occur. And so you kind of act like it's nothing or it was nothing. And I was really confronted by that, right? When the psychologist kind of responded to him and said, but something did happen. And that's the point where I kind of realized I kind of need to deal with a little bit of like the trauma I feel. I don't necessarily feel like it's affected my life in a huge way, but I definitely think that whenever you have a memory that you are not fond of, and everything in you just wishes that you did not remember that, or you did not think of that, or that you didn't even live that, there is some sort of trauma associated with that. And I talked a little bit about this in my video, right? When I talked about my experience of losing my virginity at such a young age. And one of the things that I said, I believe, kind of led up to that was the fact that I was kind of exposed to just sex and sexual things of sexual nature at a very young age. I don't think it was purposefully, right? Obviously, I grew up in a Christian home. My mom watched a lot of soap operas, novelas in Spanish, and late at night, and I would stay up late at night with her too, right? And I think that a lot of parents do sometimes just watch whatever and their kid is kind of there, but you kind of think like your kid is a kid, they're not paying attention, or that this is not being retained in their mind. And for many different reasons, right? Sometimes we're not very cognitive of or conscious of the things that we're watching or hearing when our kids are around. And so I was young, like young, kindergarten age young, 4 or 5 or so. And I would watch, right, novelas, obviously to a certain extent innocent scenes, because they don't really like get into the details, but you do see people laid up, wrapped up, you obviously know they have no clothes on, you see people kissing, watch Casos de la Vida Real, cases of real life, right, where they would kind of like show people like bad things happening, women getting raped, abused, like all these things, right? And mind you, I'm like 4 and 5 and I'm seeing all these things. I don't necessarily know what I'm seeing, but I remember just getting like feelings, urges, especially with like the Casos de la Vida Real, like those shows where they would showcase women getting raped and whatnot, getting followed. I think that instilled in me a really, really big fear of that happening. And to this day, it's one of my biggest, I would say it is my biggest fear. Not really necessarily scared of other things, but definitely it is a fear of mine, right? Of not consensually being with someone, like someone just, doing something like of that nature to me. But I think that every fear that I've had for myself over the years has now kind of moved into my kids. I have 2 girls, obviously. So every single thing I feared for myself growing up as a girl, and especially in New York, right? It's not the safest of places growing up. It's now instilled into my kids. So like now I don't really care what happens to me. I'm an adult. I know that regardless, like I can deal with it. But now my kind of that trauma and that fear is now attached to my girls. There's just a huge fear of like sheltering them from anything like that ever happening. And so being exposed, right, at such a young age, I think it opened up my mind. And then I think another reason why I kind of put this, I suppressed, you can say, this sexual trauma, this experience that I had, I suppressed it for so many years, is because I felt like usually in cases of like abuse or where anything like bad happens to a child, there's usually somebody to blame, like somebody did something to the child, right? Or negligence or whatever. Like there's always somebody that you can kind of fault. And I felt like I didn't have anyone to fault. Like for many years, I probably felt like it was my fault. It's not a typical case, right? It was consensual, and why I quote it is because I'm 4 and 5. Like, can a 4 or 5-year-old really consciously consent to something taking place? And I think that that's what I didn't kind of realize until now. Like for many years, I've kind of dealt with those memories and kind of just trying to ignore it, but just kind of pep talking myself internally and saying like, you were just a kid, you were just a kid. You didn't know any better. To kind of make myself not feel as bad about those events. And honestly, this is honestly the first time that I'm like talking about all of this like really out loud. My husband knows like a part of it, but I've never dealt with it like this. I've never allowed myself to like really think back and feel all the feelings and just deal with it and process it. And I promised you guys real content. And I'm doing this because as that person shared and we're kind of confronted, I was. So I was like, how many more people maybe have gone through something that to them is like minor. They've put it in the back burner. They don't really want to think about it. But it was something. Like we have to acknowledge that even small things are something. And in my case, right, I felt like I kind of caused something to happen. I kind of consented and drove it in a way. Like it wasn't necessarily something unwanted. It wasn't with like an adult or anything. It was with another kid. So it was just not your typical like scenario. So I really, for many years, putting it off, I would just think about it like, oh, whatever. It was like an innocent, whatever occurrence. And I really was just downplaying it for many years. I honestly have not confronted this like ever. Never had this conversation with my parents. And I think I'm learning to forgive. As a parent now, I'm learning to forgive my parents for certain things that they could have done better. And I'm learning to do better now from my kids. And again, it's not their fault. I don't think that my parents, in this case my mom, right, that would allow me to stay up with her watching certain things. did it with that in mind, right? I think that a lot of parents definitely think my child's young, they're not even going to remember this, but I do remember the things that I saw. And more importantly, they definitely did something in me. Not only did they create a fear, which to a certain extent I'm grateful, because I did live a life like on my toes. Like I wasn't very like open and trusting of everybody. I was actually very like hands off, didn't necessarily love like uncles hugging me or anything like that, sitting on people's laps. I never felt comfortable with any of that because of everything I had already been kind of exposed to, things that can happen to women and girls. And to a certain extent I'm grateful for that exposure, but I think that it also did a lot of harm. And a lot of people that deal with sexual abuse or sexual trauma of some sort, one of the things that develops in them is this like promiscuity. I'm probably saying it wrong, I'm sorry. But a promiscuidad, right? Like this wanting to kind of battle that with, you dress ways, you expose yourself, like you kind of throw yourself at men, and just you start to sexualize yourself because of what you went through. And I feel like that's exactly what happens, or what got awakened in me, right? It was like I didn't necessarily know what I was watching. Like I watched a lot of like maybe things that are innocent, but my mind at that age could not handle all of that information, could not process like what I'm watching is, one, fake, right? It's acting, and two, like this is things that happen between adults. Like that's when it's kind of normal. My mind at the time cannot process that, so I'm just thinking like the touching, kissing, like all these things are normal. And I remember, I'm gonna say I was about probably 5, maybe 6, because this was kindergarten. I would wear skirts. I wore skirts my whole life. And we would wear a uniform, and I remember I would go to, like the bathroom, and I had tights, like stockings, and I believe I would have kept, like put them down, like lower them to like my thigh, where my butt was exposed, and then I would sit on the carpet. Teachers at the front were sitting crisscross applesauce. I would sit more towards the back, and there was this kid, and it's hard because as much as I put this in the back burner, his name is like forever embedded in my mind, first and last name. And I remember what he looked like and everything. And it's crazy because, you're so young. I don't remember anyone else in that classroom, but I remember that kid. And I obviously, I'm guessing he was my age, because at that point you don't really get held back in school. I just remember him being a bigger kid. He just looked bigger than most of the other kids that were in the classroom. But I remember kind of like insinuating myself to him, right? Kind of innocently, right? Because I like thought like this was normal or something. And I would go to the bathroom, do that, and then I would come back, sit crisscross applesauce. He would sit behind me, and he would kind of like go under my skirt and touch like my behind and stuff. And I remember like there was a mixed feeling of like, I think this is normal, but also this feels wrong. I don't want anyone to see me. I don't want anyone to know about this, right? And that's where, I don't know. I had a real big battle between, well, I've kind of seen this, so I think this is normal, but feeling it doesn't really feel normal. And I would like put chapstick on and like go like that and tell him to come like by the cubbies when the teacher wasn't looking, to like give me a tap kiss. And again, this is all around about 5 years old. And it's like, where does a kid learn that from? I learned that from watching it. Like that's things that I would watch women do on the novelas and stuff, the soap operas. And again, part of me thought like, I've seen this is so normal. But as these things were occurring, it just felt so wrong. Like I felt there was something wrong. I didn't necessarily feel like I was being like abused or anything like that, because I was kind of the one carrying this on, but I just felt like it wasn't right. And then I think because of the way everything went, right? I just told you the story, right? Like I would kind of initiate this, and that is why I think I put this in like the furthest part of my mind and just would never think about this, because for many, many years, I was just like, it's my fault. Like, who the heck can I blame? I can't blame the kid. He was a kid too. My parents didn't make me do that. They didn't teach me to do that. And there was a lot of blame that I would put on myself. And that's why I think over the years, like, as these memories have kind of come up, as much as I've tried to suppress it, I kind of just pep talk myself inside like, you were just a kid, you know? And I mean, it's true, right? I really just was a kid, but I think I said that, and there's still part of me that just kind of blames myself, right, for all of that. And kind of just, I wish like maybe that was something I never lived. And I wish like it was just a normal and innocent childhood, not exposed, you know, early to sexuality. Because I definitely think that played a role later on in life, right? And like wanting to explore more, you know, at such a young age, when at that time people weren't even really doing that. I mean, some people were, but you know, I was pretty reserved. I also grew up in a Christian home. Like, you would think that would be the furthest thing from my mind, and it was actually very, very present because of the things, right, that I was exposed to at such a young age because of TV and stuff. And I think that's what made it really hard for me for many years to kind of talk about this and face this. And it wasn't until I kind of heard that psychologist tell that person, you say, but nothing happened, but something did happen. Like, someone attempted to do something and it made you feel uncomfortable. It's the same thing. Yes, it didn't go beyond that, but it's still something. You have to acknowledge that. And I think even though this isn't a typical story or anything of abuse, it is trauma, and it is trauma that I've never wanted to deal with. It's trauma that has enlisted in me that like big fear of like someone wanting to do something to me. And part of me thinks that the reason that I kind of initiated all of that was because I had witnessed also like these scenes of women being forced, right, to be with a man. And I felt like, in a way, like I was trying to get ahead of that. And I was like, well, if I want it or I initiate something, then a guy is not taking advantage of me. And it's crazy because I was 5. And that was kind of like myself being an automatic, like, I need to protect myself. I need to get ahead of this. And I think as I grew up, it was kind of the same thing too. Like not putting myself in certain circumstances where someone's going to take advantage of me, but then instead, like, I'm trying to make things happen so that nobody's forcing me for something to happen. And yeah, now that I have kids, like, and I've kind of been confronted with this, it's definitely why I was like, I have to just finally come to terms with unfortunate events, right, that happened when I was just an innocent child. And thank God that I feel it has not had like these super long damaging effects on my life, right? Thank God, you know, I'm happily married. But I think regardless, like, it's important to process these traumas because you just never know what can trigger them, how else they may come up in life. And as I was confronted by this, I just realized that sometimes we normalize small things like, oh, you know, someone kind of inappropriate passed by me. I thought it was inappropriate, but it didn't happen again, so nothing really happened. And we put things in our back burner, or an uncle like winked at me, or like I felt something, or he looked at me a way I didn't like. And, you know, but things don't go further or they don't happen again. And we try to like just normalize it and just shut it down like it doesn't happen. And we have to acknowledge when something feels wrong, and things that memories, right, that we've wanted to just get rid of, like, we have to process them. We have to stop internalizing these things and stop downplaying sometimes the trauma and the experiences that we've lived through. And I'm hoping that as someone sharing their story kind of triggered me to go back and realize, like, I did go through something that was, you know, sexual exposure and led to kind of a sexual trauma. Hopefully me being vocal about it, you know, if anybody else is suppressing something, allows you to process that, right? And ultimately, you know, when things happen in our childhood, it's really, really hard because we're always kind of looking for someone to blame. And it's easy to blame ourselves. In my scenario, I feel like it was even easier to blame myself. But ultimately, like, a kid is a kid. Your mentality is not of an adult. You can't actually fully consent knowingly to anything. So if something almost happened, if something did happen, regardless of what the situation is, please don't blame yourself. and know that it's just important to talk about it. It's important to process it, especially as parents, right? We don't want anything to then come up, right, in the way that we parent. And I think that it's just important to acknowledge and not downplay certain things, and say, yes, I went through this, but it's okay. Like, I'm now on the other side. And I think that, as I kind of broke down a little bit and shared this, like, I feel so much peace. I can't really describe it. Like, my heart feels lighter, if I'm fully honest, is how I feel. Like, I kind of feel like a weight off my shoulders, a baggage off of me. Like, I can finally talk about something that happened so many years ago that I've never wanted to give any attention to, never wanted to like make it bigger because I thought it was something so small. So I really do hope that if there's something you need to talk to someone about or be real with yourself about, that this may be your encouragement to do so. And I think that what we live happens, everything happens for a reason, right? And ultimately, I thank God for sheltering me, for always being there with me regardless. And honestly, going through that experience, right, I think it's gonna help me be a better parent, right? It is why I'm very, 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 very mindful of what I expose my kids to. There's certain shows, things that I just won't put. There's even very innocent scenes that I will skip over because of my past. I find that my child does not have the capacity right now to possibly process and fully understand certain things that they may be normal, right? But they're normal in adults. As a child, you don't necessarily need to be exposed to that right now. I don't think you need to over shelter kids. I definitely think we need to have hard conversations and real conversations with them as the times come up. But I think that there's definitely a big, we have to be cautious, right? It's very dangerous to expose kids to things at such an early age. And culturally, I've seen it, little boys like having like older women kiss them, or just different things. Sometimes we think things are innocent and they're nothing. And no, like, a child should be able to be a child and should be able to live in the mind of a child. There is no reason to have to expose them to sexualize them and all these other things until they get to a certain age where we can have those conversations and they can have a better understanding of things. Like, there's no need to do that too early. So ultimately, I'm glad for everything that I've gone through because I'm hoping it's going to make me a better parent. I think that it's also going to help me shelter my kids to a certain extent, right? I am glad that my parents did protect me in terms of never stayed in people's houses, never did anything of that nature. And I'm gonna stick to that, right? The old-fashioned way. I think that there are conversations you need to have and there's exposure you do need to give to your kids, but I don't think you need to put your kids out there, right? And just kind of sometimes put them in harm's way, right? I don't think that we should ever be too trusting of anyone. And I think that as they get older, right, obviously having the right conversations, letting them know, like, if something happens, you can always talk to me, what to do in those cases. Absolutely, right? But I think that there is definitely a difference in, having conversations and just kind of throwing them out there, hoping nothing happens. And I think that, at least for me personally, I don't judge anyone that chooses to do differently, but for me personally, like, I do choose to protect my kids' minds, my kids' eyes, what they see, what they hear, as much as I can for as long as I can. And when I feel that they're of age, have, the appropriate conversations. And even now, like, my child is young and my child knows, like, if she's getting undressed, like, nobody should be seeing my private parts. That's a conversation like we've already had with her because that little bit she already understands. So I think that those conversations are important to have with your kids. But you as the parent kind of have to determine that. But don't let kind of trauma like stop you. Let it make you a better person. I'm hoping that everything I've dealt with in life, right, makes me a better parent, makes me make better decisions, right, for myself and for the well-being of my kids. So I definitely encourage you, if there's anything that you have to process, please do so. It's healing, right? It's healing to talk about it. It's healing to confront things that we've been suppressing for so long. So I definitely pray and encourage you to heal, to talk through anything you need to talk to, and to really process anything that you've been internalizing. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in.